Great, thank you, Kirk. For our second presentation, incorporating resilience into Maine DOT project design and planning, is given by Eric Ham, Senior Environmental Engineer at the Maine DOT's Environmental Office. He has worked at Maine DOT for 14 years with a primary focus on natural resource issues. Recently, Eric has been a team member on transportation system vulnerability assessments and planning and design of transportation projects focused on climate adaptation.
Thank you, Kim. Definitely not an engineer. You'll find that out as soon as I get talking here. So that's quite a glam shot too. It's not a headshot like everybody else's. I really like that. So yeah, there we go. All right. Kirk had some cool videos. I have some, I guess calling them cool isn't really the funnest thing when it's damage to the infrastructure, but they're awfully kind of eye catching when we have them. So really happy to be here to kind of talk about what we've been up to today. We have a good team at DOT that's working on this. We're all kind of shared technical abilities to kind of go through some of our vulnerability work. Definitely, excited to continue to work with Kirk with what he just talked about. But we've been able to do some good things so far. So talk about some of the storms, some of the stuff we've been up to. Whoop, not with that button. Okay. So, I think Joyce made the point earlier for those that were here to listen that some of these recent storms, these January storms, kind of really continuing to make this stuff real for people, right? Like it's definitely, people talk about the flood of 87 and the flood of, some of these older flood of records. And now some of these storm events, more contemporary storm events, kind of live in folks' minds. That's Route 1 in Lincolnville. It was a really dramatic picture with that kid's boot. But they, that was quite a storm. That's it. This is the same storm, kind of a pre and post. I tried to get the view of you see the Deer Isle Bridge there in the background of some of the damage on the approach to the bridge in Deer Isle during that storm. That, now that these storms are also present in people's mind, I think it kind of changes, some of the perception. We have a project in Deer Isle where we've been talking about some work on a causeway, and I think we originally started having conversations about trying to do something out there. You kind of have mixed reviews about what climate change is and adaptation, and then you have all these storms in January, and next thing we know, we're out there in public meetings and people are like, please raise the road even more than what you're already proposing. And so I think just important to kind of keep an eye on perception of when we have these storms. So that same storm, Kirk made the point about the difference between kind of a bathtub model and surge and all those things going on. A lot of the vulnerability reports we did is just strictly off what we have available right now and kind of a bathtub approach. But then, some of that storm in January, that's Route 1 in Scarborough. You like saw the surge and the high tide align. And so that storm was probably more about those things than it actually was about sea level rise, but you're actually kind of seeing all of those factors come out. The graphic at the top shows that the blue is the actual gauge in Portland. The red is the measured surge. That's kind of a small figure. I apologize. And then the green dots, our hydrologist, Charlie Hebson, was out on the causeway taking shots as the storm was coming up. And so he was able to correlate some of that data with what the gauges were showing. So it was pretty interesting. So again, those storms inland, again, Joyce mentioned it can get easy sometimes to focus on the coast, sea level rise models, everything else. But what we saw in some of those December storms are also these kind of unprecedented amounts of water. Charlie put this together real quick for us, where you see some of the upper Sandy River up in Madrid. Some of those other areas, the storms were like over a 500-year interval storm. It's like not even kind of really worth even trying to measure at that point in time because you're so far out on some curve that doesn't have any records on your correlation. But it just to demonstrate that those storms were, well outside the design parameters of just about anything we had in the ground. All right, so hopefully my animation works here. Just an example, during one of those storms, we actually replaced this pipe in, I think it was 2010, 2011, Parsonsfield Route 160. That's what it looked like during the storm. It's a really nice comparison. And that's what it looked like after. We had a total channel avulsion, and that whole stream was then going down the road, down the ditch and through a 24-inch culvert instead of those twin 6-foot culverts we had in there. And so in the middle of the storm, we're out there trying to trench the whole stream to get back into the culverts where it belongs. So belongs the wrong word, but Another example of some of the storms is a cool shot, kind of an aerial view of some of what happened in Jay. Same thing, massive storms. This wasn't even a stream crossing. This was just, kind of straight up too much water and just tearing the ditch and the drainage apart. Had that whole area there really got hit hard. So that brings me to, talk about doing some vulnerability, some asset vulnerability work. We originally, it was a lady that I work with and I were starting to look at what happened. We get all these reports of flooding here, flooding there. How do you start kind of comparing across our network where the flooding's happening, where it matters most, where we're going to see people cut off, where we're going to see, maybe see it more in the future. And so we took an original kind of shot at an off the cuff vulnerability assessment. Really looked at, it's heavily weighted. It had kind of asset based scoring. It was really heavily weighted towards the lowest lying infrastructure we have along the coast, places we were already seeing flooding. Wasn't any big surprises there, truthfully. Following that, we were at, some of the projects I'm going to talk about. That's really where we picked some of our adaptation projects out of, was some of that original kind of assessment work. We looked at adaptive capacity of those highways, how important they were, what the traffic was. We had a decent kind of pile of factors in making those decisions. And most recently, we had a firm come on and help, kind of take what we had unpolished and started, if you will, and try to, kind of move this vulnerability report into, kind of a more usable place, more digestible place. And so these are some figures. Those numbers are, just a representation of some of the things that come up as vulnerable based off, kind of our known issues with culvert sizing, asset conditions, lots of things that we were able to pile in to make those decisions. We're kind of moving towards, this is some good information. We're still kind of starting with things in our mind. We're moving towards a more corridor heavy approach on some of the inland assets. And so it's like, well, so if you got one culvert in a 10-mile stretch versus saying, all right, what's on that entire 10-mile stretch? How many culverts? What's the condition of everything, and how do you make factors? It's kind of our next step is pulling it up to a corridor. So as I mentioned, part of that original analysis and then that, kind of the second analysis backed it up. We ended up picking I think it was 8 projects that we had called our climate adaptation projects. And we had some low-lying coastal roads, kind of well-documented flooding. Again, I think in some ways we had a bunch of people go out and say, it's going to be easy. We're just going to raise these things up 4 feet. Away we go. And I think we found out on every one of those that there's nothing easy about working in those coastal environments. And again, my background being in natural resources, those are some of the most sensitive resources in the state for endangered species and salt marsh and lots of things there that cause some pretty heavy complexities. This one specifically, Phippsburg, going down to Popham Beach, those of you familiar. Out on the end, it does regularly flood already. We have a cultural resource, an old church out on the end that if we were to have to mess around with the road much, we were going to have issues with that property. And so it just to point out, every time we talk about, okay, let's try to do an adaptation project here, there's always a pile of complications associated with that. So just a little further look at what kind of what we were looking at there. Those 3 sections are the sections that we kind of programmed to start looking at. I mentioned the one down on the end. The data over on the right is actually data out of a report that the Department of Conservation did, Pete Slavinsky with a bunch of folks. And it kind of points again at this, approach where we're starting to see things flooding now and what things may look like, towards the end of our planning horizons or the life of the infrastructure. So this is a little dated in the year it came out in 2016, but I think it does a really cool job illustrating, it's like, so your average flood per year over the 20 years leading up to that was, So one time every 3 years, you could see inundation of the road. And then if you add 2 feet of sea level rise, and then you look out into the last 20 years of the 100-year horizon, then it floods 130 times a year. And so that was, just, we're kind of, as we see these storms and they're starting to happen annually, we're really, on the projections we're really on the front side of what is going to be, some long-term issues. And again, Joyce mentioned raising bridges. There's lots of things that we look at when it comes to an adaptation project. Doesn't need to be necessarily going up 12 feet tomorrow. It can be incremental. Thank you. It can be done in a way that you plan to allow the road to go up in the future if you have to put crossing structures or however you do that. And so, especially when you have infrastructure around them. So inland resilience projects, I was going to get another list. I looked at all this, and as I continue to think about it, we make the point that it feels like almost everything we do has some, resilience point to it. On the inland, any culvert replacement, any highway reconstruction job, any large culvert job, bridge job, there's always, this element of kind of making bigger and planning for, that. It's not often where we're not, kind of upsizing things. And so I think the take home message on a lot of the inland stuff, the coastal stuff, was new for us to just like take a project and say, we're going to raise this road up because of climate adaptation. But those inland projects are not new for us. Like our hydraulic standards and the things we use have been around for a while. We've been successful with those. Things like Kirk had a video, Route 26 there up in Bethel or Newry. Those are hard, that's obviously in that realm of projects you don't design for, right? When you get storms that big. But most of the time, we're already incorporating a lot of that inland stuff into our work. And so opportunities, I throw this nature-based solution stuff out here. We have a lot of discussions when it comes to discretionary funding opportunities or things going on, or the state of Maine has actually been working pretty hard on trying to implement some nature-based solution approaches into their own permitting. Folks, they can be a challenge, and I say this in jest. We see a lot of folks that have done some pilot projects of putting oysters in bags and stabilizing some shorelines, and they're cool projects. And then you turn around and try to implement that on the side of Route 1 or something like that, and it's a bit more challenging. And so the nature-based solutions approach is important, and we continue to kind of be involved in the conversation, but it's definitely a future opportunity to try to figure out how to marry some more tried and true, engineered transportation approaches with, some of the nature-based side that other folks are looking for. So again, preparing assets for future adaptation. Joyce again stole my thunder on like raising bridges, all these other things. Like, is there a way to just make sure whatever asset we put in the ground might not be as hard to adapt, kind of over the years of its life. And then data. Kirk's presentation is great. Obviously, our coastal assessment that I referenced here will probably change a decent amount based off some of the information he's going to provide when it comes to the actual hydrodynamic model, not just the bathtub model. I think a lot of the projects we took on now, we knew that, but they were already flooding. We knew there were already issues. There wasn't a lot of speculation on the projects that we currently are working on. But it's going to be a really nice tool to have that coastal flooding, but just continuing to try to improve. We talked inland, like inland is a bit harder. There's a lot more infrastructure, a lot harder to predict exactly when we're going to see issues. Most of our issues there I feel like they're a combination of asset condition and rain. It's not just like it saw too much water or it's old. It ends up being a bit of both. And so it's harder to predict for sure. So I think I was on time. Hopefully she's not showing me anything. And I think that's all I had today. So thank you very much.